Hello everyone, it's Brent and I'm back to do our Recitation 19 and talk about HTML5. So today's recitation is going to be pretty short. There's not a whole lot to talk about with HTML5 since we've kind of been integrating this into our code since the beginning, but it's important to note that there was a transition between HTML4 and HTML5 and the value that HTML5 adds to web development. So if we look at this list, there's a lot of pretty solid things that HTML5 adds onto the HTML4 standard. A big part of it is just semantic ways of coding. So footer, header, and nav used to all be just divs with IDs. This is something that you all probably never even noticed because from the very beginning we've been using header, footer, and nav since HTML5 is so pervasive at this point. There's also different ways that we can communicate with servers. We have JSON requests and HTTP requests and stuff that we can send from our JavaScript. This is another thing that you all might not have noticed since we use mainly Ajax and other libraries that took care of this for us. HTML5 also offers storage, which is pretty cool. So if we do something like this, you can see if we go to memory, application, here we go. We have local storage and session storage. So let's see, local storage. This is something that's kind of interesting. It can get kind of difficult to mess around with to make it work properly, but so let's say, let's just copy this line of code and we'll post this in the console. So we set this thing in local storage, then we can do local storage get item. And this is supposed to work. Local storage stores data and it won't be deleted when the browser is closed. So there's local storage and there's session storage. Session storage is like this, except for that when you close the browser, session storage is also closed. Now this is slightly different than using cookies, which I know is something that we haven't talked about yet, but essentially being able to store data on your HTML page, you might want to store whether the user is logged in or not, so they don't have to log in every time. For the session, you might want to store that if you're like a bank, and then when they close the browser, you log them out, or there might be some data that you keep track of so that you can, obviously for now everything we've built is so straightforward that sometimes it's hard to understand how we can leverage this and how it's different than cookies, but it is different and it does add a lot of value. The other thing, and this is something that happened a long time ago, so you all probably didn't notice this either, is HTML5 uses a video tag instead of using Flash Player or Video Play plugins. This way, media is consistent across browsers instead of having to have all these different Flash plugins, and that's why Flash has become out of date because we no longer need it since we have the HTML5 video tag, which gives us better video playing. And it also gives us a lot of cool ways of customizing the video frame to make it unique, so it's very useful. And then obviously there's some optimizations for performance, and then they actually added some compatibility stuff as well. So HTML5 actually is substantially quote-unquote better than HTML4, but it's very hard unless you really knew a lot about HTML4 to tell what you've gained. But you can read this article if you want to learn more about it. Honestly, I think that HTML5 is common enough now that you should have a lot of experience with it, but if you didn't know it, it adds all sorts of tags. So we have this data list tag. So if you were to open this, you know, when you go to, when you go to a website and you start typing and it gives you a drop down of options, right? So like if you were to create a state selector, you might want it to auto fill out, right? And then they select it from a drop down. So that's what the data list tag is useful for. It's just another type of form tag. It also adds a lot of support for responsive design. So we have responsive image widths, but also you can actually set which image displays based on the browser size or window size. So for browsers less than 600 pixels, it'll display a small flower. So maybe if we do an inspect and resize the window, see that? So it has a small flower, and then as we size it up, it should switch out to something larger. There we are. So that's just one example. You can actually query the size of the window to determine what you want to display. They allow you to size text based on what is called a viewport. So your whole screen is considered the viewport, right? So normally you'll see most websites with this tag, meta name viewport content is width, device width, and initial scale is 1.0, meaning when you open the page, it scales everything as this. What I have right now is my device width, and then what happens is as I resize the page, different things can happen. So we have these media queries. So if you use frameworks like Bootstrap, or if you roll your own, you can actually have your web page change dynamically based on the size of the browser window. So if we'll look at my website, and I'll show you this because I wanted to integrate some responsive design into my page, so that if someone went onto my page on their phone, for example, right, let's size this down, size it down. So there you go. So my nav bar changes from being a top nav to this kind of drop down rectangles like this, right? And so that was a choice I made in order to be able to display all my content in a certain way. And so the idea is that your web pages really should be designed, what they say in the design world, and this is something we'll talk about in another lab, is they should be designed first for mobile and then second for desktop. Because the belief is that the majority of users on the majority of websites will try and access them on their phone, and if they can't access it on their phone, they're going to think your website is kind of outdated. So it's smart to start with some CSS queries and design your web page for what it would look like on a phone, and then scale it up to make it work on a desktop as well. And HTML5 allows us to do a lot of this responsive design that we couldn't do in HTML4. Let's close these windows. We also have this dialog tag, which I have honestly never seen or used, but I will show you a demo of it. And so you have something like this. You can set a dialog to close if you want, and that will close it. So it's kind of like a poor man's modal. I don't know if we have done modals yet, but modals are those things that pop up and then everything else goes faded in the background. I suppose this is useful. I've never seen it used before. Maybe it's because this is the default styling. But since you can set this property to open and close, you can toggle this window with JavaScript. So in that sense, it's kind of useful. So you don't have to create some div that you then set to display none. You can just use this dialog thing instead. Okay. Then we have the output tag, which is another one that's kind of a wild card. I have never seen this before, but this one is for representing the output of computations. It's not particularly more exciting than just using text, but for some reason it exists. So yeah, that's a thing as well. Anyways, basically HTML5 is extremely powerful, but the point I'm trying to make to you is that we've been using HTML5 all along, and so as a result, you might not have thought about all these things that you're able to do because you were just able to do them. You didn't have to go, oh man, if only there was a standard that had a single video player, if only I had some sort of on-browser storage. You have that, and those are things you can take advantage of. So if you wanted to learn more about some of the more advanced HTML stuff that's basically beyond just tags, but also storage and styling and media queries and all that stuff, you can go to W3 Schools and you can look at their... You can look through the HTML, look at stuff like iframes are cool. You can display basically another HTML page within your page, which is kind of cool. So when you see, like last week's security lab, they were doing like a hackable website within their website, and that's an iframe. There's all sorts of things you can do now. I just don't even, I haven't even looked at every possible tag. But for example, there's a code tag, entities, emojis, char set, URL encode, XHTML, extensible, markup, all this stuff that exists. I would start with the style guide. Read how you're supposed to write HTML. You've been doing it correctly all along, so that's totally fine. But anyways, what I'm trying to make is that HTML5 has made this effort to make everything more consistent across browsers, and it's a very, very powerful tool. It's something you should be aware of in case in an interview they ask you what is HTML5 and how is it different than HTML4. You can tell them, oh, they have a video player. They semantically added a lot of tags that allow you to describe parts of the web page. You can say that they added storage, and they added new ways to do requests. They added different optimizations. So you can list all these things so that they know that you know what HTML5 is. And the reality of it is that I don't think you'll ever be writing HTML4 because every browser now supports HTML5, I believe. But if you ever run into a compatibility issue, you might know that it's because someone didn't update to HTML5. So anyways, I appreciate you all listening to this lab. It's shorter than usual, I know that, and I think that's probably okay because you guys have a lot of other stuff going on with term projects and your milestones for your web development projects, so I don't want to get in your guys' way. But anyways, thank you for coming watching this lab and putting some thought into HTML5, and especially for interviews and stuff like that, knowing what it is, and also for your own work, you might be able to apply some of these tags that maybe you didn't know about. So thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys later.